Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Bible study today through 2 Samuel chapter 18. We're going to talk about the battle between Absalom and his father David for the throne of Israel. Free PDF on our website. Let's talk about our timeline. This happened during the reign of David, obviously, and that stretched from about 1055 BC to about 1015 BC, 40 years in total. Most of our characters are going to be familiar to us. We've got David, of course. We've got Absalom, who was David's son with Maacah. Absalom killed his brother Amnon, and then he rebelled against his father and started a coup to steal the throne in Israel. Joab was a very faithful servant of David's. He was a very seasoned warrior, and he led a third of David's army in the battle against Absalom. And then Ahimaaz was the son of the priest Zadok, who was in Jerusalem. And then our last character is a Cushite. We're not given his name. He was a messenger who carried the news of Absalom's death to David. So that's a little spoiler what we're going to talk about, what's going to happen in this battle. As far as our map, the battle that took place between Absalom and David's army seemed to stretch out over a significant portion of land. It's just referred to as the forests of Ephraim in verse 6. So then we move over to page number 2. I've got 3 sections in this chapter. The first one is verses 1 through 8. David's army fights Absalom's army. So in preparation to fight against Absalom's army, David divided his men into 3 companies and assigned each to a general. Joab, Abishai, who was Joab's brother, and then a guy named Ittai. David wanted to accompany the army. He was a seasoned warrior himself, a man of war, but his men refused. They said that he was too valuable of an asset to be risked on the battlefield. So David accepted this. He did, however, order his 3 generals to, quote, deal gently with Absalom for his sake. So David still has this soft spot in his heart for Absalom, and I don't think he should have had that, but he did. So he says, he wants Absalom to come home safe, basically. This battle then took place. It was fought in the forests of Ephraim, and we're told that David's men had victory, killing around 20,000 enemies. In verses 9 through 18, we're going to talk about the death of Absalom. So during the battle, Absalom was riding a mule, and his mule went under a tree that had low-hanging branches. His hair, you remember, which he used to let grow out for a year, his hair got caught in the tree, but his mule kept walking, and so Absalom was left hanging from the tree, suspended by his hair. One of David's soldiers saw Absalom and reported this to Joab, and Joab is kind of shocked. Joab asked the man why he didn't kill Absalom right there on the spot, and the man said that, he was afraid. He knew of David's instruction to deal gently with Absalom, and so he wasn't going to do it. And I have to say, based on David's track record of punishing people who kill his enemies, this guy was probably the wisest man in all of Israel. If you've been following the story of David, you'll know what I mean by that. But Joab did not care. Joab knew what needed to be done. He disregarded David's words. He took 3 javelins and he stabbed Absalom in the heart. And they then threw his body into a pit and covered it with a large heap of stones. Now, when this was done, when Absalom was dead, the battle was called off. So now to section number 3. David's grief over Absalom's death. And this is going to carry over into the next chapter as well, verses 19 through 33. Joab sent messengers to David to report on the battle. The first one was a Cushite. The second one, who he was reluctant to send at first, was Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok. Now, although the Cushite got a head start, Ahimaaz actually outran him and made it to David first. Ahimaaz told David that his army had been victorious, but he didn't say anything about Absalom. When the Cushite arrived, he then delivered the news of Absalom's death to David. And rather than celebrating the victory of his men who had risked their lives to save him and his kingdom, David kind of boo-hooed about Absalom being dead. David was, quote, deeply moved. He went up to his chamber and he wept, saying, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son." We're going to pick up on this story in chapter 19. Joab is not going to be too happy about the way that David responds. Now, our application section as we close out chapter 18. There's a time for gentle correction and there's a time for firm judgment. David wanted to gently correct Absalom. He had already done that in the past, right? But you kind of see how it had turned out. Absalom hadn't really learned. So David wanted this gentle correction, but Absalom believed that firm judgment was what was necessary to save the kingdom and to prevent future problems. And I think Joab was probably correct about that. Now, the same choice has to be made in the Lord's church. There are times when we need to gently correct someone who's in error or someone who makes a mistake. People with soft hearts will respond to that correction positively and change their life. But there's also other times when a situation calls for strong condemnation, perhaps even the exclusion of an individual from the fellowship of the Lord's church.